Hey guys, this is Yoda. This will be my preliminary tier list for War Within Mythic Plus. We're now about a week in a pre-patch, so Mythic Plus is coming out in 1 to 2-ish months, but we've done a lot of testing on the beta. Been getting a lot of questions on stream about what I think is strong, what is fun, what should my tank play, what should my healer play, what's a good choice, blah blah blah. So hopefully this helps answer a lot of those questions. We'll start at the top. Meta for sure. To no one's surprise, Augmentation Evoker and Mage for whatever seasons in a row are most likely going to meta again. For those unacquainted, Augmentation Evoker is basically a support spec, and it buffs everyone in the group, including the tank and healer, and that's kind of how it does damage. The DPS contribution in War Within is actually higher than most DPS specs, but that doesn't even matter because the main reason Augmentation Evoker is required in the highest keys is that your tank and healer are often going to be struggling as the key levels get higher. They have to handle harder and harder challenges. And Augmentation Evoker just makes them able to handle those challenges at 1 to 2 key levels higher. And, in a game where the goal is to just do higher level keys, that's just way too strong to have in a DPS spec. So Augmentation Evoker is just in forever. Mage, similarly, buffs your healer by 5% with Arcane Intellect, and it buffs everyone else with all the other specs in your group, so including the Augmentation Evoker and probably your third DPS by 5%. So even when it does low damage, Mage is still kind of just in based on that. But on top of that, they also have lowest cooldown AoE stops in the game, and they also tend to be tuned really highly because someone at Blizzard just loves mages. If they're not doing well in raid, whether it's because they're actually doing poorly or they're just not allowed to lust on pull, they all just get buffed 2 weeks into the patch. So Mage is a good safe bet to be meta again for the 10th season in a row. All right, next we'll go with maybe meta. We've got start with tanks, and the first one I'm going to talk about is Blood Decay. So Blood Decay got a lot of reworks recently. The spec tree is reworked, class tree reworked, and they have new hero talents. I think most likely you want to play Deathbringer because the way the Death Strike rework works, you kind of want to invest more into EHP and less into like self healing. Because like successive Death Strikes don't really heal you that much, so you're kind of reliant on not taking as much damage, so you have heavier Death Strikes, not more Death Strikes. The biggest changes so far after all the class tree changes are one, you have lower cooldowns on your defensive, so IBF's 2 minutes from 3 minutes, and Lichborn is 1 minute 30 from 2 minutes. On top of that, you're stronger passively, so you have more armor from recent buff to Bone Shield, and you also have more passive DR from Rune Carved Blades from Deathbringer. But you do still run into the issue in higher keys where you can just potentially go from 100 to 0, especially if your cooldown rotation isn't clean or if you're not calling for externals properly or blah blah blah. Being a self-sustaining tank kind of comes as a double-edged sword. Like your health is very spiky, but some people like that playstyle, myself included. So if you like that playstyle, if you're a Blood Decay enjoyer, then it is stronger than it's ever been. Next tank we talk about is Bear. In my opinion, if you're fodder rerolling, Bear is probably the safest choice for tank. It is very strong against physical damage. It has decent amounts of self-sustain, and it's also the main source for Mark of the Wild. The DPS druids aren't looking that strong right now, and Resto Druid is also, potentially in the meta, but not like a hard lock. So Mark of the Wild is Bear is a pretty safe choice for Mark of the Wild. With the hero talent tree Elun's Chosen, your damage is mostly based around Moonfire, so your rotation is relatively simple compared to other tanks, especially compared to Blood Decay. So again, if you're fodder rerolling, I highly suggest Bear. Next, we'll talk about the healers. So in my opinion, this is kind of the order in terms of healing throughput. Resto Shaman has the highest throughput, then H-Pal, then Resto Druid. Resto Shaman also can give your whole group up to 20% more max health, 10% from Ancestral Vigor, 10 more from Downpour, and I guess 10 more from APT if you play that. Most people don't play that though. And they also have 5% DR from Earthshield, so if you've ever gone to a website to calculate if you're going to survive the one-shots from a certain boss, it's going to feel really good to have a Resto Shaman in the group, and it just plus 30% max health. That effect, in my opinion, is very, very strong, which makes Resto Shaman potentially meta. Also, they have short cooldown kick, short cooldown AoE stops as always, plus the new raid buff Sky Fury. All of that puts Resto Shaman in a very, very good spot. One thing about them is that you kind of have very long cast time healing. So even though the throughput is very high, sometimes you get stuck casting. If you're not used to that playstyle, as some healers are not, then you could struggle in that way. The next two healers are Holy Paladin and Resto Druid. So Holy Paladin plays very similar to Dragonflight Season 2 from what I've seen. You don't have to cast. All of your heals are instant most of the time, I think. Not really a Holy Paladin main, but from what I've seen / heard, most of the healing is instant, which is very good, and the healing throughput is very high. We also have Resto Druid on the list. Resto Druid's healing, I think, is lower than the other two. The main thing it brings to the group is damage. So there are some keys that are relatively easy to heal, such as like Mists or Necrotic Wake, where usually you're gated by a DPS check on a boss, like a Mist, the first boss. If you don't two-phase it, then it can get very awkward. A Necrotic Wake, the third boss, is a very, very tight DPS check where you start getting overrun by abominations. Resto Druid is very good for those bosses. If you look at damage on bosses, usually the Resto Druid is beating the tank. So that's like a very strong effect to bring to the group. And that is Resto Druid's niche, in my opinion. It's a high damage healer that can kind of keep up the healing with in most of the counters, but it's a bit lower than the other two healers in this category. Next, we'll go over the DPS. So we've got Ellie Shaman and DPS Death Knight. In my opinion, Ellie Shaman is the front runner, mainly because it's just an inspec that has a raid buff and has a really good damage profile. Anything that fits that gives me like Shadow Priest vibes from previous seasons. Right now, basically just put out 6 Flame Shocks, and then all the rest of your rotation, other than an Earthquake, is like single target spells on the main target. So your funnel / priority damage, and even your single target damage is very, very high, plus it's an inspec with a raid buff. Plus you have short cooldown kick and short cooldown AoE stop, so Ellie Shaman, I think, is in a really good spot. Next, we've got DPS Death Knight. Some may be surprised that I put it in this category, which, I'm a bit surprised myself, but the damage that they do is actually very high. They do have the rework buff, so they're kind of tuned higher than usual, I think. And the main reason I put them here is actually that Death Grip is super valuable in a lot of these dungeons. Like in Necrotic Wake, there's these throw flesh guys that are just really hard to group. In Arakara, the first boss can be kind of carried by Death Grip, which Blood Death Knight can't do because the Blood Death Knight's on the boss. You can like grip the ads on top of each other, which makes them a lot easier to deal with. Second boss, you can grip the ads in onto the boss, which makes them a lot easier to deal with. So grip is just super useful in this Mythic Plus season, and for that reason, I'm kind of putting Death Knight in maybe meta. I've seen a lot of Chinese groups playing with it, and yeah, it may be able to overcome the Arcane Intellect thing, which most DPS have not been able to do so far. We'll see. Next, we'll look at this, whatever I put in the strong category. So the first one there is Prot Paladin. So originally, I thought Prot Paladin would be completely unplayable because Word of Glory didn't heal for anything. And the armor was too low. Basically, you're just walking into packs, getting trucked, unable to heal yourself. They've made some adjustments to that. Word of Glory now heals you for quite a bit more. And your armor is higher after the buffs we recently got. So basically, the way Prot Paladin works right now is you walk into a pack, you do massive damage, because I think Lightsmith is a bit overtuned. And I've also been playing Crit Wings with Prot Paladin. And you just use your cooldowns in periods of like high damage intake. And then if the damage intake is still high and your cooldowns are over, you just have to run away. It's like a kite meta again. Although a lot of the time with the higher armor, you don't even have to run away. You can just take the pack with like nothing, depending on how easy the pack is. Just Consecrate and Shield of Righteous is often enough, especially in lower keys. Prot Paladin also has very good utility. Avenger's Shield is as good as it always was. And 1 minute attack is also good. And Spellware is also good. So Prot Paladin is definitely viable. Probably one of the stronger tanks right now, especially if the damage remains this high. I do think once you get to higher keys, if you're not able to tank the pack with no cooldowns, then Prot Paladin is just going to immediately fall over, which is unfortunate. You also do require quite a bit of healing, like even in lower keys, especially compared to a Blood Death Knight or a Bear. So if you like being independent of the healer, then I guess tanks are just not for you in War Within, unfortunately, thanks to Blizzard's rework. But Prot Paladin definitely requires a partnership with your healer to keep they're keeping you alive. Then on the boss, it's easier for you, so you have 1 minute attack and Spellware to keep them alive, plus lay on hands. So it's kind of a partnership. So yeah, Prot Paladin's good for that. Next, we've got Vengeance Demon Hunter. Venus Team Hunter is a lot weaker than it was in the later seasons of Dragonflight, which many people are happy about. You don't have double sigil anymore. You have very much lower parry than you used to have. What you do have is the Felsguard Hero Tree. It makes you in meta for a very, very long time. Like you can Feldev, then meta to reset Feldev again. Then meta falls off and you get another free Feldev. So you're in meta for a very long time. And you also play, or at least I also play, double brand build. So you either have meta or brand up for most of the time. And when you have those, you're kind of like able to survive most packs. But when you don't have those, you are very, very squishy. You're going to require a lot of healing, even like in meta / in brand. You kind of require at least a little bit of healing. When you have no cooldowns, oftentimes you're just going to either require massive spam healing or have to run away or you just die. That's kind of just how the game is right now for Venus Demon Hunter. That said, you do have pretty high damage, like not as high as a Paladin, but if you count Chaos Brand, it is as high as a Paladin or even higher. So VDH could be very good for timer. It's just kind of harder to play because it requires so much healing and, it's not as tanky as some of the other tanks we have. Next, we've got Brew. Brew, I think, is actually individually stronger than Paladin and VDH. Like, it's a bit tankier, maybe not as tanky as Bear. And it's very easy to heal. A lot smoother damage in tank thanks to Stagger and Ox Dance. Ox Dance actually makes Brew very, very tanky against bosses with tank busters. Other tanks are like, struggling about their rotation. Like, what do I have for this? What do I have for this? Brew's just like, LOL, Ox Dance, I live everything. Of all the tanks, Brew is also the least nerfed because I think Brew is kind of where Blizzard wanted tanks to be. Like, they require healing and their damage intake's very smooth. The only problem about Brew is that you don't have anything like crazy that you bring to the table. Like Blood Death Knight has grips and self-sustain. Bear is Mark of the Wild. Paladin has great utility. VDH has Chaos Brand. Brew kind of has like Mystic Touch only, and Mystic Touch is like not that good. Like Sweep and Ring and are nice, and Clash is nice, but it's not like anything crazy, right, that other tanks would bring. So that's the main problem with Brew, in my opinion. But it is still a very strong tank. If you're a Brew enjoyer, this is probably the strongest it's ever been. So yeah, good season to play Brew if you are enjoying Brew. Next, we'll talk about the strong healer, in my opinion, is Presvoker is the only one I have in this category. Presvoker, I think it has like the healing throughput / damage / utility to keep up with the other three healers. The only thing that it doesn't have is that it requires your group to play around you very heavily. Like, especially in Pugs, a lot of the time you'll be like, okay, I have Dream Breath ready. Hopefully everyone's in the Dream Breath, and your group is just like not on the same page. They're just scattered to the four winds. Even in coordinated groups, sometimes it's just very hard to play in your healing like range. So that's why I consider Presvoker to have some downfalls. But healing wise, it's very strong right now. You have one especially strong thing they have. If you play it is Flame Shaper. You can like Cauterizing Flame. You can Renewing Blaze another member of the group, like your tank, which is insane for a tank to have that. And you also have 1 minute TD. So for tank healing, Presvoker I think is probably one of the strongest. It's just they suffer from the issues they always had, which is range issues / people not standing in Dream Breath. So that's why I have them in strong category and not maybe meta. Next, we have some melee DPS. Sub-Rogue, Havoc, Enhance, and Survival are all doing very, very high damage, like maybe as high as DK or maybe just a little bit lower or maybe higher if they have the bug fixed like Sub-Rogue. The main problem is that all of them just don't bring like something crazy to the group other than Havoc bringing Chaos Brand. Like, the grips that Death Knights bring are just more valuable, in my opinion, so far than the utility that these other ones bring. That said, they are very strong. They do high damage. They can all survive the highest keys, especially Hunter post rework. It's just kind of like the world we live in that melees, the bar for a melee to be meta is just extremely high, and Death Knights being like unkillable plus doing high damage plus have death grip kind of meets that bar in my opinion, but the other melees don't really meet that bar. So yeah, these four are all doing pretty high damage, and they're also like have enough defensive tools to survive all the highest keys, and they all have pretty good utility though. So I think you may find some of them. You may find them being played in like keys that are maybe same level as the highest keys or 1 kilo below very easily. Next we've got the Inspecs. So there's Aflock and Shadow Priest. So Inspecs are always like kind of held at a higher. they don't need to be as good to be considered meta just because mage is always in every group, which means every inspec is automatically buffed by 5%. Think your raid buffs. Shadow Priest in particular has a history of being meta with Og and Mage for all of Dragonflight. Currently on beta, it's kind of hard to say that where Shadow Priest is because one of their stronger, I don't know if it's stronger, one of their hero talent builds, Archon, is based around Halo. And Halo is just like unplayable in Mythic Plus because it is randomly pulling a bunch of mobs out of combat. So it's really hard to tell where Shadow Priest actually is. From what I've seen from the few runs we actually completed where they didn't pull extra mobs, Shadow Priest damage is not quite as high as Ellie Shaman, so I'm putting them in strong, but it could very easily be like up here or here. Maybe we're one buff away or one buff picks away, who knows. Aflock recently got nerfed. I think their AoE is still strong, but their single target is a bit lacking. That's why I have them in the strong category. Warlock also is kind of being held to a high bar, like high requirement for a Warlock to be considered meta because they don't have a raid buff. Next, we'll go into the mid specs. Prot Warrior, I think, is playable, but it's probably the worst tank. It's just weaker than Bear from what I've seen in all categories. Like, it does lower damage, has a worse raid buff, heals itself less, and also takes more damage. So, in my opinion, if you were going to play a Warrior, if you're going to reroll to Warrior, then you should just reroll to Bear instead. If you already play Warrior, if you're like a Warrior main, then it's kind of just as good as it was in Dragonflight, which means like not that strong, but it's still playable in high keys, especially strong when you can reflect. Next, we've got Windwalker, Beam Hunter, and basically the rest of the DPS specs here, other than Moonkin, are all like doing okay damage, not as good as the ones that I have here. So from what I've seen, but you know, one or two buffs and they could easily be considered strong. Most of these I think are probably out of the running to be meta because, as I said before, the bar for DPS specs is just really high to be considered meta since Og and Mage are just hogging two of the spots. The third spot either needs to be an int spec with a raid buff that's doing crazy good funnel damage, or like Death Knight, which has invaluable grips. Maybe not even Death Knight. Like maybe I'm coping here and it's just going to be Ellie, but you know, who knows. Next, we've got Moonkin. Moonkin, I think, is just tuned a bit low right now. It is an inspec with a raid buff, so, you know, sky's the limit for specs like that. Maybe it's a few buffs away from being up here. Who knows? Right now, I think the damage is just a bit lacking, so we're putting them in mid. Next, we have a few specs I haven't played with at all. Warrior, DPS, Feral Druid, Ret. All these specs, I just haven't had the chance to play with them because I've only been playing for like a week. So it's hard for me to gauge. From what I've seen / heard, Fury Warrior has really good AoE, but maybe not as good boss damage. Same with Feral, though I really have no idea because I haven't played with these specs, so I really shouldn't say that much about them. What I will say is that on the beta, people tend to play like what's super strong so they can practice it for when it goes live. So if these specs were like meta breaking and strong, then I'd probably have seen them already. Next we'll go needs buffs. I haven't actually seen any Outlaw Rogues play, but I do tend to follow Rogue because Rogue is one of my favorite specs. Outlaw, from what I've heard / seen, just needs so much help. It's like the third best Rogue spec. So if you're an Outlaw main, unfortunately, we're down bad. All right. So that is most of the specs that I wanted to talk about. Obviously, I haven't had the chance to play anything. I to play with everything, and also I'm not all-knowing. Things could easily change. The only specs I've actually played a lot of are the tanks, and obviously I was quite wrong about Prot Paladin at the start, especially after buffs, so I can be wrong. And also, just to reiterate, the balance, it seems, is going to be closer, a lot closer to Dragonflight Season 3 than Season 4. Like in Season 4, if you were playing a non-meta comp, especially if you didn't have a Shadow Priest in your group, then you were struggling and down horrendous. Whereas in Season 3, you could play a lot of non-meta comps up to, or even like at the same level as the top groups. For instance, at the start of the season, I was playing like a Prot Paladin group in a VDH meta. I was playing like no Og. Then later on, we were playing like Rogue and Bear, and the best comp was like the one it is in Season 4, and we were doing pretty good. You know, we were doing same level keys almost as the meta groups. I think the balance will be a lot closer to that than it was in Season 4, where, like I said, if you didn't have a Shadow Priest or you weren't playing meta, you were just down bad. So I think the balance is pretty good right now. This is just where I see most of the specs like lining up on a tier list, I guess. But at the end of the day, it's World of Warcraft. Play for fun. Play what you want. But I think this is kind of where I see the meta right now. I'll try to update this when Blizzard makes massive changes or when I play with more specs in a week or so. So yeah, thank you for watching. Peace out.